David Cramer is the founder of Sentry. I use Sentry to get alerted when things go wrong and then to figure out what actually is going wrong. And I'm not alone. David shares that Sentry is doing 9 figures of revenue, so at least 100 million. If you haven't followed David online already, then you're in for a good surprise because David is extremely straight talking.
The only way you can hire the best people is by paying ludicrous amounts of money to acquire failed businesses.
We start off by talking about M&A.
Almost all of the time, you'll at least get some ROI for your time spent.
We also talk a lot about ego.
You got to have this naive, like almost blind ambition. Like believe that this stupid thing can be bigger than it possibly should be capable of being.
And much more.
The reason I've been able to do what I do is because I'm willing to make just rash decisions. It's how we develop the best product. It's how we develop trust of customers. You can't have a shared vision, generally speaking. Like the way I paint this is going to be wildly different than you paint this. Don't build a damn status quo thing. Don't build logs or something like that. Like you will fail overnight. So don't just build something that exists for no good reason. Just don't do that. And then just try a lot harder than you are trying. Success is just grind. There's nothing more to it.
David, you put out this tweet the other day that if someone's like 2 or 3 person startup and it's not going that well, they should think about M&A, and it's one of the biggest mistakes they'll make if they don't.
Yeah, so I've been angel investing for a number of years now, and a lot of like what I post, whether it's like this long form writing or just blurts on Twitter, it's just something that is like probably loosely happening. Sometimes I try to be clever about hiding it because people get mad at me quite often, in fact. But this was kind of triggered as like I've now seen several companies that I've invested in sort of come to completion, not succeed, like just basically dissolution or something similar. And I'm like, and not a single one like reached out to me. And I'm like, and it's one of those things where I think people just are unwilling. Either they don't know because people are not counseling them, or they're unwilling to do it. And the mistake people make is like, as a founder, is like, you kind of have to always like eat. You always have to do the thing that's unfun or uncomfortable because your goal needs to fundamentally be to like do something successful. And I think people naively make the mistake that they're going to found a company and it's going to turn into a real business. And it like almost never happens, right? Even Sentry, like, which were a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, a 9-figure revenue business. It's like, yeah, it's sort of successful, but like, there's sort of these barriers that are hard to reach. And so, we've passed a lot of them, but every sort of step, it gets harder and harder. And one of the things you just have to do is always like deal with these uncomfortable situations as sort of this primary founder, CEO type personality. And I often wonder if people don't go down this approach because, they don't want to. Like, as in, like, they think it's not going to work. They're pessimistic about it, or they've been guided not to. And I definitely know there's a lot of people who are like, oh, no, M&A is bad and blah, blah, blah. And these are all people who have failed in their careers. And so I would ignore all of their advice. But the problem is almost certainly your business is going to fail. So then why would you not explore M&A with why would you not explore every possible outcome you have fundamentally, right? And that to me is the mistake. And I think in this case, like I pretty much invest almost exclusively in companies that it's literally like a twofold agenda. I invest as somebody who's like interested as an angel, though mostly from a relative, I want to see what's happening in the world, but also from as an executive of a tech company who can acquire most of these. So a lot of the companies I invest in are like DevTools startups. And it's just one of those things that I'm like, why would you not do this? And I don't know why they're not like investors telling them to do this, or like real investors, like venture capitalists, or they've not been taught this in YC or something else. It just doesn't make any sense to me because almost all of the time, you'll at least get some ROI for your time spent. Now, maybe you have a 2-year period where you got to hang out at this company, which is not good for everybody, or rather, it can be good for everybody. Some people choose to not take advantage of it, is what I would say. Like a lot of people in acquisitions, especially acqui-hires, do not really want to be part of like this other company and contribute and blah, 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 which is like, it's like a known quantity thing. But I will tell you throughout my career, like when I was at Dropbox, everybody was like an MIT new grad, good and bad, like really smart people, not super capable of a lot of things, not really aware of a lot that exists in the world, but they had a few senior folks. And the way they started growing, at least from my perspective at the time, sort of these senior, really high domain value folks was just through lots of acquisitions. And half the time that acquisition was for like primarily there were two people that were really like those were the people they wanted out of that company. And it was usually like two founders or something like that. Right. And so I just think it's silly that people don't explore this. And I've yet to uncover the root cause of why, but I do think it's like a really important outcome. And I do think like if you're going to start a company, you know, yes, try to build something very successful and whatnot. Step one is try, which most people don't do. And then if it doesn't work, which it statistically speaking, it likely won't, try to find a good outcome that is not just you being egotistic about like how great you are, because clearly you were not that great if you couldn't succeed at this business. Like clearly you did not have those right skills or some right capabilities. And that's just the truth, right? Like, and even Sentry, like I would argue like maybe we got a little lucky. I worked my ass off, but we had product market fit right away, which is a really hard thing to achieve. And we had a large TAM that has been able to grow with us for the most part in what was considered a non-category, like error monitoring was not a thing and arguably shouldn't be a thing. It's just should be one feature, but we've turned it into a 9-figure business. But that's like a rare thing, right? And so I don't know. It's this wacky thing, and I just think there's a lot of people glossing over the details in sort of startup land in the sense of like they just naively tell each other that they're great and everything's going to be hunky dory and stuff instead of having like honest conversations about like this is how the world works. This is how you should think about it. Even when you raise money, like I remember I had first partner pitch I did, and I didn't know what I was doing. We had revenue and I thought it was going to be easy. I go in and they're in this partner pitch. We made like $600K in annual revenue at the time. They're like, if somebody offered you 200 million for the company tomorrow, would you sell it? I'm like, absolutely. I would sell it. That'd be like the most ludicrous return in history. And they declined investing because of that statement. And I'm like, I don't even know if this firm exists anymore. And, good riddance because they don't know what they're doing. But I'm like, and it's like a trivia game. They know the right answer is like, take the offer, like take the 200 million offer. It's like stupid not to, but still they play a stupid game where they pretend all these other things matter instead of like the actual, like ROI, right? The return on investment. And I don't know. I find the game silly. And maybe that's partially because I didn't grow up in this world. Like I'm a self-taught software engineer, but I just think there's too much of this propagation of nonsense between people. And so my view of the world is just ideally in a way that's like not harmful, speak what I believe to be a more authentic truth,
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a dev tool, at some point, your customers are going to start asking you for enterprise features. WorkOS offers you single sign-on, skim provisioning, and audit logs out the box. WorkOS is trusted by Perplexity and Vercel, as well as Workbrew, a homebrew management startup that I recently interviewed. I just told Mike that WorkOS is the sponsor, and this is what Mike said.
Yeah, so WorkOS isn't paying me any money for this. I pay WorkOS money for this, but WorkOS is like one of the best developer tools I've like ever used. It's the documentation and the experience with building with them is so good. Like I initially was almost like, okay, this seems expensive, but then I built an integration with them in about 20 minutes that I had spent 2 days bang my head off the wall trying to build it directly with Okta. And then with WorkOS, I then have like many SSO providers like supported instead of just one. So yeah, like for me, WorkOS is one of the nicest developer experiences I've encountered in the last like 5 years, probably. And it's not surprising because a bunch of the developer team are ex-GitHub and therefore very good at their job.
Go to workos.com to learn more. Yeah. Is it like kind of, I guess, like doing what is right for you? Rather than like, there's this like, the reason people do it is like this kind of propaganda. Probably like VCs would prefer you to stay in the game on this like very, very minuscule chance that things will like turn around completely.
It's hard for, I don't know, because I've never lived in one of those situations. And there are a lot of really bad VCs, to be fair. Like the standard VC is some finance person who has no idea like how any of this works. And it's like an Excel sheet for them, right? And so I don't know if it's coming from bad advice from them, like as in they literally say, don't do this kind of thing, or if it's coming from lack of awareness of these things being totally, which is kind of the same. If you don't give advice, that might as well be giving bad advice, right? Because like I will say our first partner is super helpful for me because I didn't know how the venture game worked and all this stuff. And over the many years now, he's been able to provide me a lot of advice, both personally and professionally. And it's like one of those things where you just don't know what you don't know. Like, how are you going to ask a question if you don't even know that line of questioning should exist? And so I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm sure if you went and interviewed a bunch of people, you could probably root cause a little bit of it, but it's just silly. Like people should explore every avenue and try to be successful, but there are other versions of success anyways. And particularly venture capitalists are fine. It's not even their money most of the time. And so you should consider your personal ROI too. Like how much time you've spent on something. How do you make up for what almost always is lost personal revenue, right? Like usually, like when I left Dropbox to start Sentry full time, I took like a 25% pay cut or something at the time, which was a lot of money because we all got paid less in Silicon Valley way back then, and I mean that's a big deal. Like you rack up debt or whatever, like you're living much more frugally. It's not fun, and so if you can make up for that lost time, or you can advance your career. And you can maybe work with other people who you can learn from, things like that, which again, there's like an ego involved in a lot of this. I think you need to consider all of those things. So both, and to be fair, I think a lot of founders are considerate of their team, but I think they're too considerate of investors and often they're not being fed useful advice.
Actually, you kind of spoken a bit about ego a couple of times, and I think in your tweet as well, like how do you think like founders should like what should the role like of ego be in the sense of?
I think you got to be borderline sociopath to be successful. Like I tell people the reason I've been able to do what I do is because I'm willing to make just rash decisions. Now I make them with the information on hand, but I don't go seek out a bunch more information before I make a decision. And part of that is like this, like just huge amount of confidence I have. You can call it ego, call it confidence. It doesn't really matter to me. It exhibits the same way, right? And you got to like not care about being wrong, right? And that almost certainly is ego, but it's like a rational version of it where that's actually how you have to operate. And if you look at any leader, like you can even look at, we can talk about all the presidents all day long. The good presidents also do this. And this is why we do talk, is because like they did this thing and it was like clearly bad, but they did it based on the information they had. And you have to do a thing always, right? And so I think the two sort of core things are you always need to be ambitious, like forever ambitious. You can never sort of settle in the sense of like, oh, it's not really growing, but maybe if we just keep plugging away at it or something, it will work. It'll figure itself out. No, if it doesn't work, you try something else, you try harder, you figure it out. The same hiring and firing is a really big challenge for a lot of people, myself included, in that same line of thinking. But it's like, you got to have this naive, like almost blind ambition, like believe that this stupid thing can be bigger than it possibly should be capable of being, and then you've just got to be really indecisive and not be too sort of like, you can't take these failures personally. Like a criticism that people would give me early in my career is I would make these decisions, and if they failed, I would not admit fault. And I'm like, yeah, because that's the name of the game is not to take personal accountability for everything we do. We're going to mess some things up. We're going to succeed at other things. It's always, you got to move forward. Like if whatever you're doing is keeping you on a flat line, then like you're failing, right? Like one of my favorite quotes that like really represents what I think founders need to understand, or leaders actually. Leaders is probably a better example than founders. I think it's the same thing, but is I'll butcher this, but I think it's Einstein, which is like the definition of insanity is like continuing in the course of action, like basically without changing, expecting different results. And so I use that and I think about that quite often because like, if something's not working, you have to change something. Now, what you change often varies, right? But like clearly something's wrong. So try to root cause what most likely could be wrong. You may not get it correct. You may not be perfect. It may be like you accidentally picked the fifth most important thing that was wrong or something like that. But the problem is when you just don't do that, it's worse,
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a lot, I know, but
no. But I think you also talked about like how you would, this kind of on the confidence you would, you mentioned that you believe you could solve every problem that was in front of you, this kind of confidence.
It's an interesting thing because it's a double-edged sword, right? And you see this, like the massive egos from the most successful people in the world. It's very hard for them to be humble, which is fair. Like they're unbelievably successful. And when you hear about their stories, like I've been listening to the Acquired podcast more recently. My God, the episodes are long. But when you hear more about the details of some of these founders, like the the greatest founders that we've ever known, of like sort of the stories, the early days, you grow deep admiration for them. And I feel like I've been through the trenches and I'm like, you guys are so much better than me. Like in every single way, like you're just insanely good, which makes sense. Like, because it's so rare to build even a company of Sentry scale, let alone some of the greatest companies, we've ever seen. And so I don't know, it's a really interesting name, but I do think that my biggest gripe in the industry, and this is just somebody that's like an executive at a company, less so a founder, is like, it's always hard to hire great people. And it's annoying, the venture game, because the only way you can hire the best people is by paying ludicrous amounts of money to acquire failed businesses. And it's even more annoying if you can't hire those people because they don't even consider M&A because of who knows, right? And so that's like the personal annoyance I have with the whole thing. Because that entrepreneur, like that sort of the grit and the person who's just willing to deal with chaos is like such a valuable skill set. Doesn't mean they can be like, a VP at a company or anything, but like you just need those kinds of people to run projects, to run teams, to run basically everything. It's like the most successful way you can do anything, because they're not gonna, they hate process. They just want to get stuff done. They want to like build something that's good. They care about those things. And I feel like it's a hard thing to teach. And the only way I've found to bring in those people that's not basically hiring founders is like new grads, and which is a great way to hire for what it's worth. Obviously, like there's a challenge, you can't have all new grads, but it is like one of those awkward things in the industry where a lot of these, and everybody knows this in the venture crowd, is like everybody starts companies. They know most of these companies, the best case outcome is M&A. And so the reason people often invest in founders over ideas is because, well, that founder's really good. Maybe they'll strike it lucky here, kind of thing. But most companies will be happy to like acquire like a good team, especially if the team's not huge. And that's what the other thing is, like these conversations, and a lot of what I'm saying from that angle is more about like if you're earlier stage, if you're like sub 10 people, you get 10, 20, 30 people, and then you don't have a real business, you definitely up first off. Like you should never have grown the business that large, or the business. But that's a much different math formula that goes into that kind of acquisition at that point. And usually, I think for any sane company, it will involve not acquiring the whole team, just because like the whole team is usually not worth that much, and you've got a lot of redundancy in there for an already established business.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you answered like one question that maybe I asked you in the first recording before we redid it, but it's that like what the value you have as like the acquirer for these kind of small companies is that this is potentially this is the best way to get the best people. And
yeah, it is. It's like, and that's why I'm like, more people need to consider it, because I need to find those people. And again, it's not everybody, there's so many people that start companies, and not every company is going to be aligned, and you still got to have like cultural sort of alignment, right? And that's a big deal, especially in these days. Like even the like remote versus not remote is a much bigger topic point. And like another annoying thing about all these startups is everybody was remote because half of them started in COVID, which is a problem for a lot of companies like ours. But and so not everything's a fit, but I think you at least have to go down that path, because the other thing people don't understand is you don't know anything about a company without being part of the company or really getting into some serious conversations with them. And so this idea of like, oh, we don't think that company makes sense for us, or we don't think they're doing stuff in a space that's related to ours. It's like, you have no clue. Like most technology applies everywhere, first off. And often the scale of what you're doing is insignificant anyways, right? So a lot of acquisitions that I've seen in my career will come up and they'll be like teams that augment other teams, and it might be internal teams or something like that. And that's totally fine. Those problems can be interesting, but I think it's just like, if you don't explore it, you will never know. You will never know what opportunities existed. And maybe the right way to explore it is to not talk to venture folks and talk to your angels, like the actual operators, the founders that you've decided you want on your cap table. But I don't know. That's the main thing is I think people don't ask for things enough in the industry. And I think they rely on too much of this, what a banker is telling them is true sort of dilemma, which is not the right way to do anything. So,
yeah. One of my friends is not DevTools, but he just went through like a kind of not like a big exit, like this sort of thing. And it worked out really well for him, and you know, made like a good salary that year basically, and then it like looks great and everyone's impressed. Like it's a great like LinkedIn announcement. Like he got a really good job from it.
Yeah.
Not there, but like somewhere else. And then it's like he's really happy, and you know.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think it's also like there's no free lunch anywhere, right? Like we acquire a company. Our hope, our ROI calculation is that will accelerate something, right? Because why would we pay a bunch of money just to make less money than we paid, right? In the grand scheme of things. And I think people also got to recognize that. It's like we're investing in a thing because we think that thing is a good investment. And often that's the people. And if those people are a good investment, the business should also grow, right? Ideally at a faster clip. And you're getting equity in that new business. Thus, it's really good for you because like, it's also like important because there's sort of this insider network of venture and stuff. And even companies. And so sometimes this opens up opportunities that otherwise would be hard for you to access, which is another really important thing. Because I actually think it's a lot easier to start a business than it is to get a job at some of these, you know, high tier companies. And so there's something to consider in that regard too. Like, would it help you accelerate your career? Would it push you into new sort of positions that could be really interesting where you could learn? And maybe you take that, you know, 2-4 years down the road and try a new thing with everything you've now learned, you know? Because I actually think, I've mostly worked at startups all my career, and Dropbox at the time was the largest company I'd worked at. I guess technically still is, because Sentry's not as large before I left Dropbox from a headcount point of view. But I learned a lot, actually. Like, I was there sub 2 years, and I learned a lot about, like, just a different kind of organization, a different way things were run, how an organization was run when they were super wealthy or when they were all just sort of Ivy League elite and they came out of this. You know, there's all these little things you take away that you apply. And those are very, very useful lessons. You get them at small companies and large companies, mind you. And they're there if you look for them. They're not there if you're like, oh, I hope I just get a bunch of money out of this acquisition and then I'm just going to like cruise control. Like, good luck. You'll fail at everything you do in life if that's your approach. Like, it doesn't matter, you know? It's also a small world. So if that's your personality, you know, any sane person will like look for references on you, and they're not hard to find. So,
wait, and just to dig in, that's because you're saying like don't be like a kind of extractor, like
don't be one of those people. Like,
I
don't know, whatever your belief system is, karma or something else, like it'll inevitably not work out in your favor, you know?
Yeah.
So
like, you're selling something that isn't really there, like, and then post acquisition, they're like, wait, what? Like, you've faked all the, not even like faking, but you're talking about that sort of hyping it up.
This is the problem. Like, ego is always the thing here, because it is that double-edged sword. And I think some people just have like, everybody kind of needs to be humbled all the time, like every single person. And I think it's a tough thing. It's why you see like there's all this like rhetoric from like wealthy people now, where like, especially like Elon Musk is a great example. He just says whatever he wants and doesn't really care, because nobody's humbling him. Nobody's like sort of forcing him to step back and be like, what the dude, you know? And I think it's especially tricky for early stage founders, because you have to develop this massive inherent belief that you can succeed and you can do this and you're good and all these things, right? And then you don't. And you go through like an acquisition, it's like, hey, actually, like, maybe you're not as good as you think, or maybe you're not, maybe good is the wrong word, but maybe you're not capable of the thing you thought you were, or not yet, or you didn't, you know, something clearly wasn't there. And you can't just say, well, you know, the product we built, you know, the market wasn't ready for it yet, or, you know, something like that. Because like you can make any idea generate revenue and be at least a degree of success, right? And so it comes down to more experience, execution, all these other little things. This is my genuine belief, because product market fit, it's not like a thing you just generally you don't stumble upon it. I think that a lot of companies have, but it's like a thing you create, and you create it through understanding like how you would get there and what the faults are and how you'd execute it, and you know, all these little things. And I definitely have seen a lot of people in my career that think they are more capable than they possibly are, and it creates a lot of problems because they don't want to be less. Like imagine you go, and I know somebody like this, you go and you worked at a company for 10 years or something, you got promoted over and over, and then you go work somewhere else. And but like, you can't actually get an equivalent job somewhere else, because it turns out that company was And it basically just inflated your ego, and you actually were incapable of doing the things at a normal place like that. I know actually a handful of people like this. That's a bad situation to be in, mind you. But that's like a very humbling experience, you know? It's like, you kind of got to be like, I guess I'm going to take ideally a better company, a lesser role, and then I'm going to continue from there, which shouldn't be a problem, but it is a problem for people, you know? It's just how humans are. So, anyways, I know I've gone down a long rabbit hole here, so.
Yeah, going massively off piste, but like I was listening to someone talk about Churchill the other day, and like how he like was in charge of this battle in like World War One, and he like was responsible for like 100,000 people just dying, and he took it like really, really badly, and he basically resigned and like went into the trenches in World War One and like just like redeemed himself, which like not many people would do.
Yeah.
And I feel like it, like what you're saying is like can be okay to like just take the, like, you know, have your ego to take a bit of a battering. It doesn't mean that that's going to be like the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think it's why it's useful, and this is why like the rest of our executive team knows my intention is to be somewhat public about what we do. And like part of it is because like it is humbling just to admit blame. It actually doesn't matter. People like respect it way more than anything else. So it's like a win-win. Like not only can it bolster your ego, but it also helps you like recognize what did and didn't work, which is a useful skill, you know? And I don't know. It's just like more people should do it. Again, it's this challenge of like, you've been convinced by other people and by yourself that you must be great. You must blah, 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 all these things. And it doesn't mean you're not great at a bunch of things, but at the same time, you're also not great. Like there's many things you suck at. And I will be the first to tell you all the things I am garbage at, which is why I've changed my role so many times in the company. I'm like, I don't want to be CEO. I hate hiring marketing leaders or sales leaders, you know, all these other things. And when I just recently last year hired a CTO and changed my role again, and I'm like, I don't really want to run a large organization. Why? Like, I don't have an ego that needs that. I started a very successful business and I get to work on interesting things and I get to work on corporate strategy and all this stuff. I don't need 200 people reporting to me to feel like I'm more successful, you know? And I just, you know, some people I think get that in doses, right? Like they might be like, yeah, I agree. I don't care about the reports, but then they'll have the massive ego about something else that they are not going to be good at too, you know? So.
Yeah. I think even just the way you describe like great and like suck and stuff is different to like most people. I don't know if it's just like what you mean is different, I think, to what some other people.
I think I'm just like, I'm hypercritical. And so not everybody likes this about me for what it's worth, but like I have a very low tolerance for something that causes, even my wife hates this, like a low tolerance for something that causes me grievance. Like the littlest things, and generally the only way I avoid it is just by like out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. But it is useful, I will tell you, in a lot of things, because it means I care about some stuff that is literally a waste of time, which whatever, you know, I don't try to micro optimize about which things I should care about. But also when you're developing product and any kind of customer centric thing, it is really, really useful to have a low tolerance for like friction and things like this. Right. And so, you know, some of the team, I'm sure, is like annoyed by this, but I will go in and I have some side projects once in a while, and I'll be working on my thing, just naturally working on it, and I'll try to use Sentry, and I'll just get annoyed instantly. Like I'll be like, this thing sucks. It did not solve my problem in like 2 seconds, you know. And obviously, it's not that extreme, but I think I'm a big fan of just exaggeration, whether it's useful or not. I don't know. But I think this like sort of low tolerance is like I think I have a good product sense, which helps. But I am a very good person to basically do something effectively like user testing. If your goal is to minimize objections, because I will find everything in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's like, I'm sure other people can too. I don't know if there's a skill here. I am seemingly good at it, but I don't think it's a hard thing to be good at. But there's like this thing of like, I'm not a patient person, which is not a good trait for what it's worth. Or being patient is a good trait. I am not patient. But I do think this thing for just like not tolerating things that are frustrating is a really big deal. And I've had that my entire career. It's not like I developed this starting a company. It was more problematic when I was like 20 years old. It's more useful now that I'm older, probably because I'm a little bit like wiser and stuff too. But it has always helped me build better things or be more ambitious with what I'm doing, because I'm like, first off, that's not that hard. Most things are not that hard to accomplish. Or at least what sort of the result looks like is pretty black and white. And so finding a path there, as long as you're sort of like a logic brain kind of person, which a lot of us are in the tech scene, right, is not that hard to extrapolate. And so then it's just like, okay, do the stuff. And then when you get to a step, like you got to unwind it. It's like, oh, I want to build this technical thing. You effectively break it down and be like, how would I build this technical thing? It's the same for everything else. And so it's like, if you can reason about these things and just implement them, and then just have this kind of, I don't know, like I early in my career, I used to associate it with like work ethic, and maybe it's a bunch of these things, but it's really this, like, I always say like good is not good enough. There's the, what is the other one? Perfect is the enemy of done, or I don't know what it is. There's a bunch of these sayings, but this idea of like, oh, it could be better,
Yeah.
is a really useful idea. It doesn't mean you should always make everything better, right? Or you still got to prioritize in there, but kind of just not resting on your laurels and not tolerating this thing where it's like, well, it kind of works. Because like, if you look around, like that's most businesses. They build some like thing, and then they wonder why it like plateaus really quickly or isn't successful. It's like, well, you didn't try hard enough. You didn't say, how could this be better over and over and over and over until you ran out of things that it could be better, at. And we did that a lot in early days Sentry, where it's just like, oh, this kind of widget, it's annoying. Like, it's not good. How could it be better? Or, oh, this information is not clear enough. How could it be better? Things like that. It was like all these incremental changes, which is much harder to do now at our scale, which is one of those things that bothers me. But it was a really impactful thing early on. It's how we developed the best product. It's how we developed trust of customers, that we were like good, that we were going to be the right partner, which is how like you should think about customers. They're looking for a partner, not just to buy a product most days. And so I don't know. I don't know how I would identify those traits in people without seeing them or working with them, kind of thing. But I think it is like the best people I know exhibit some versions of these things.
I've seen it for like people of like your kind of caliber of like really successful DevTools founders do talk about this kind of like pain threshold, like lowering it and like just being really dissatisfied with like the status quo. I was trying to decide whether to talk about hiring or branding. Actually, do you have a preference? Which one do you think is more useful for?
I think branding is more interesting because people have no opinion, bad opinion, or just uninformed kind of thing.
Okay. Okay. Branding.
Everybody has an opinion on hiring, so.
Okay. So how do you think about branding at Sentry, David?
So, okay. It's been interesting because I don't know anything about, actually, I shouldn't say I don't know anything about marketing, but I'm not a marketing person by trade, right? Like everything I believe in is basically what I've seen, or I'm self-taught and all this stuff. And I still would say I'm not a marketing person, but I do think I understand a bunch of this brand stuff. But I've also been learning more about it, talking with other kinds of businesses lately. And so one thing I've grown to believe in is that brand is basically just in an absolute sense, extremely important, no matter the scale of your business. Because brand can be personal brand, it can be corporate brand. It actually doesn't matter, right? But like brand is this thing that sells like your values, and inherently what you want it to sell is like this thing people want or believe in, right? And it's really interesting because like I remember this stage of my career, I'm better to articulate why all these things might work that I believed in, but early career I could not. And even early career, like early Sentry. But I remember this moment, we were at the PyCon conference, the Python programming conference in the US. It was in, I think, Portland. And there's this arcade there. It's a barcade. Fits like 100 people in there. This conference is like 1,500 people. And we're like, let's host a Sentry party at this thing. And we're like, oh, it only fits 100 people. I'm like, it's fine, And my God, is this place, honestly, it should fit 50 people. It was super cramped. But what happened is, everybody actually wanted to go to this because it's a barcade. It's a programming conference. It's super fun. It's like a well-known place also in Portland. I don't remember what it's called, but we let a bunch of people in early who were like people that were just interesting folks or sort of members of our community, things like this. And, I was supposed to say start at, I'm just picking a time, like 8:00. We're all in there at 7 or something, hanging out, having a good time. There's a line around the block to get in. the place, I don't know if we ever let anybody in because it was at capacity the whole time. And I'm like, that was a success. To me, that was a success, right? Because we created demand for something that people wanted and they couldn't get it, which is still a useful tool. And even at the time, I thought it was a success, but I didn't quite understand how to articulate why. And to me, a lot of brand is creating demand. Like, it's like, oh, like their brand represents these things. I want those things inherently, or I believe in those things. Thus, I want them. How do I get them, kind of thing? And sometimes the brand is not used in that way. And so like a good example of that might be, trying to think like sports cars are a good example of a brand that's creating like pure demand because of like they're very big showpieces and stuff. But the other thing I've come to appreciate more recently is brand is also useful in small scales in like low customer counts. Because say you're a company that can only have 200, like the Fortune 200 or whatever. Let's just say the Fortune 50. That's the only group of people you could have as customers. It's still useful in that regard because you're still selling reputation and values and trust and all this stuff. And it's going to look wildly different than, say, what brand might look like if you're Coca-Cola or something, right? You're appealing to a different audience. The things you're sort of showcasing as your values change. But it's one of those things when you recognize it, you can understand then why it's important because it lets people know what you represent. And so, as over the last few years, I've developed I want to say more knowledge, but at least more of an opinion and thesis around this brand stuff at Sentry. And we thought a lot about it. It was like, well, our brand is actually like authenticity is a big part of it. And it's really important to understand that brand is at a company like Sentry, but I think at most companies, it's going to come from like a founder or a leader or something. It's going to come from like a person, not 20 people. Just like everything is going to come from one person for the most part. Product vision is going to come from one person. Like, doesn't always mean it's like the top person in the company, but everything successful comes from one person because you can't have a shared vision, generally speaking. Like the way I paint this is going to be wildly different than you paint this, even if we're looking at what we're supposed to, like we have this exact replica in front of us, right? And so a lot of our brands stem from me and what I believed in and things. So things like, let's make a really good product is like part of what I care about, or let's just be honest. Let's be sort of tongue-in-cheek humorous. Like all those things are things I believed in. And then you hire other people that also believe in those things. And that's how you kind of scale it out. But so for Sentry, we've used that in a lot of ways. Like we're not good at demand generation. And I think part of it is, and so actually, let me step back. So Sentry's business, if anybody listening doesn't kind of grasp it, we have something like 65,000 paid logos. And what you should take away from that statement is we are extraordinarily large for an enterprise business, like in terms of logo count. And to contrast that, we are in the application performance monitoring category, APM. I'm going to give you two other examples of companies you have heard of in that category, New Relic and Datadog. When those companies went public, they had around 10,000 logos. And mind you, the companies, those logos paid a lot more money than the average person pays Sentry, but the scale is different. Thus, the way you execute on the business is wildly different, right? Like, one core tenet we have as part of that, which you could say is in our brand. It's not quite in terms of how we represent it, but it is a core value is, well, the product has to be accessible to get that many people, let alone to say get 250,000 logos. And so part of accessibility is affordability and all these other things go with it. And so when we think about brand and just marketing in general, it's like, well, how do we get 250,000 logos? Well, you're not going to buy, $1 billion worth of ads to do it because it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's like, how do you get there? Well, the way we get there, the way we found effective, because we've not found anything else, it's just broad awareness. Like, if people know what we do, they know what we stand for and why we're good at it, and they have a use for what we do, for what we build, like they would get value out of it, or they have a need for it, they will likely buy our product, or at least consider buying our product. And then when they try it, they'll see it's good, or they'll connect with our values, and then they will buy it. And that works. And that to me is brand in a nutshell, right? And you can slice and dice that any way you want. There's so many amazing businesses that are represented purely on brand, like Porsche. Like I love Porsches. If I say Porsche and you know anything whatsoever about that manufacturer, you have some opinion about what they represent, right? Like I would tell you, like their handling is amazing. Like the design is amazing. Like all these things, these attributes that they kind of suppose. And you can't just talk them, right? They have to live them. And so like a counter, actually, a negative brand can exist too. Like back in the day, I don't know if this is true. I'm not that much of a car guy in this sense, but like Fords were known to always break down or something. That was effectively part of their brand, for better or worse. And so it's kind of interesting when you think about it that way. But to me, brand is, what do people think of when they think of your brand, you as an individual or you as your company? And you need to make sure those are the things that are actually relevant, that are actually going to drive customers and whatnot. And so it's an interesting, and it's also fun because brand is like a lot of different things. It can be your opinions. It can be visual design language. It can be clever humor and stuff. You know, there's lots of different ways you can slice and dice it. So I think also, as somebody who's not really a creative person, but aspires to be a creative person, it's just one of those fun areas that allows you to be you, or to do the things that you sort of believe in, and which are usually like the right things, to be fair. And they just help drive success.
Yeah. So it's like it's like leaning into your kind of what your company does and who you are.
It's leaning into your belief system in a lot of ways, right? Remote first is actually a big thing people put brand behind because they believed in it. A lot of them did at the very least. And that helped them. Like maybe it didn't sell their product, but it helped them hire or something, you know? And it's like other people that are like, yeah, I believe in remote first. That company represents my values, you know? And that's like an obvious one that you see at face value. But a lot of brand is just kind of like, if you ask yourself, you would be able to answer what is that a value? Like, you know, Liquid Death is one of my favorite, more recent brands. Is because like, if you know what Liquid Death is, so Liquid Death is water in a can, flat water in a can for the most part. And they make a lot more money than Sentry at this point. They've grown phenomenally. They're brilliant at marketing. And you got to ask yourself, why do they make money? It's like, I love this saying. I never read the thing, but there's this old thing that people would espouse, like the 5 whys. It's like root cause analysis. And you basically just keep trying to drill down until you feel like you've gotten to the bottom of something. And I always like to think that way in a lot of stuff. And so it's like, well, why, like, what is interesting about Liquid Death? They make a lot of money and they're a new entrant to the field and they just sell flat water. So why do they make a lot of money? And it's hard to say, you know, because brand can mean different things to different people. But one thing I think they did extraordinarily well is they sold, it's like anti-marketing is what they call it now. But they sold water in a can that kind of looked like beer. And you kind of look cool drinking it. Like, in fact, I was at a concert, a festival in Vegas. This was like when we were young. It's all the pop punk nostalgia. And the only water they sold was Liquid Death. And I'm like, damn, they did well. They did well. And that was only possible because they already had the brand, right? Because everybody's competing for those kind of positions. But the brand is so, like, that one's fun because the brand is so wacky. And you're like, if you try to reason about it, like, isn't it like using algebra or math? It's not going to make any sense. You got to reason about it with like emotion. Like, why would somebody choose that? Well, I've got this boring can of water here, and then I've got this cool can of water here that basically looks like somebody put a tattoo on a can. I'm like, I'm going to go with the tattoo can, you know? Because it's got to emit like this visceral emotional reaction often. And this was the same thing I would say is like, you know, you have product market fit, not when you look at some funny math formula that, a consultant came up with. When you show it to somebody and they are just like, their eyes light up and you're like, holy, this is cool. Like, you get that emotional reaction. That's when you know you've achieved something. And I think it's the same for all of these. And so I just think that they're really interesting analogies, you know, to why would you choose a company or a product? You know, it's not because it has the coolest feature set most of the time. Yeah.
I feel like it's very, I don't know, like Sentry is like very like, it does really genuinely have like a very like, it feels like it's going to have a full, like everywhere you look, like even in the dark corners, it's going to be like well made and kind of like, I remember like when I first heard about it and before I used it, like asked my friend and he was like, oh yeah, Sentry's great.
That's good. We have a lot of problems, which again, you can never settle for it's good.
With the context of how you think.
Yeah. But also a lot of people would agree. And I think it's one of the challenges you get when you get to sort of the multi-product stage, which is where Sentry's been at for a few years, is just inherently everything gets more complex. The problems you're trying to solve are more complex. The solutions are more complex. And it's really hard. And like, I think one of the most useful skills in at least product, I don't know if you could apply this to everything, is simplification. Engineers love to flex deleting code. I don't care about deleting code, but the one thing I would agree with deleting code is it simplifies a problem, right? And the more simple you can design a solution, the better it is, no matter what, almost certainly, right? And inherently, like one problem Sentry has at our scale is there's a lot of complexity, like because we have so many customers, which also makes even the brand marketing stuff really complicated. It's really complicated to do something that you actually know will have any real result. It's like our current thing that I don't know if we just launched it this week or whatever, is like we're doing this roast of Sentry where it's like, just talk about it. So we're like, this will be funny. Who knows if it'll be successful, it'll be funny. Also, maybe we'll get some product feedback and maybe it'll ground some people and humble them and stuff. And I think at the very least, there's a practical lesson you could take away is, think outside the box. A bunch of blog posts and buying some ads on Google is not going to make you successful. Like the industry is way too big, And so if you can stand out a little bit and if you can do it in an authentic way, then the authenticity basically helps because it grounds you in what actually might be useful. It's really valuable, And so, but yeah, we are not without our flaws that we are continuously trying to address. So.
Interesting. But that all matches with your personal brand, your personal beliefs, like even just like roast Sentry is like kind of like makes so much sense given the conversation we've just had.
Imagine Salesforce doing something like this. They would never they're like what is Salesforce's brand? Stiff corporate company, like with a bunch of salespeople that you don't want to pay for. Like I'm like, what is their brand? What do they stand for?
Yeah. Well, there is almost a brand of like people dissing Salesforce these days anyway. Like that's almost a brand in itself.
Yeah. And I actually think the risk, and maybe I don't know, because like I only know what I've lived, right? I wonder if there's a risk that a lot of companies start up with a great brand. Like they have a lot of great value they're adding, people believe in it. And then there's a point where either they lose their way or it's too hard or you can't maintain it, where it turns, right? Because once upon a time, people certainly loved Salesforce, right?
Yeah.
It represented something they truly cared about, or IBM, or pick one of these companies that PC people don't like whatsoever, Oracle. Once upon a time, they were certainly not that way, or I'd like to believe they were not that way. And it's interesting because not every company is that way. And actually some companies recover, like look at Microsoft. I actually think Microsoft, right now it's a little weird, but like rewind 3 years or something, or 4 years when they went big on open source and all the stuff.
TypeScript. Yeah.
Phenomenal brand recovery in sort of the developer community. And like I'm a Windows user. I have a MacBook, but I almost exclusively use Windows these days. Mostly because I just think it's a better experience now. And I also like game and I do a bunch of like photo stuff, which is just easier for me on Windows. But I'm like, so you can fix it if you choose to fix it. But also that choice has to come from the top, right? Like that change was when they hired Satya, like that massive pivot. And now it's unclear because they're big on this AI thing and it's a little gimmicky. But it's just really interesting if you try to analyze these companies. I don't know. It's become one of those things because I don't really get to build interesting software anymore. And you always got to find a thing that, I don't know if motivation is the right word, but like kind of keeps you energized and excited. And I think that always has to stem from learning. And so for me, this brand and sort of these larger company, like bigger than us journeys and stuff are what has been like really interesting to me in recent history and have kind of kept motivating me to grow and learn more and whatnot.
That's amazing. Okay, so last two questions. One is, are there any dev tools that you're excited about at the moment?
I will say the one thing, I'm a skeptic by nature. And this AI hype wave reminds me of the crypto hype wave where everybody's trying to get rich quick. And so super skeptical about a lot of it, but also because I'm not an idiot. Like it's very easy to see through stuff. But I will say we adopted Cursor in recent history of Sentry. I very rarely buy tools at Sentry. I'm very anti-waste money. I was really impressed with Cursor. And primarily just the type ahead was like so damn phenomenal. And so like really happy with that. Also, the guy seemed really, I don't know any of them personally. I'm not an investor. I wish they had called me before they raised any money. I would have happily invested. But the folks I've interacted with also seem insanely smart, so that I really, really big fan. Beyond that, I'm like, have I used anything even because I don't use much software. I have a few side projects I spin up that I run on various hosting services. I have some hello world LLM rag thing, like everybody and their mother. This one does like, it tries to answer questions about board games. Cause like if you ever play board games, inevitably you're like, wait, what happens in this? I got to dig through the rule book. And I'm like, LLMs can definitely solve that. And so I built something with that I run on Vercel, which is generally a really good developer experience. I would say I'm a fan of the JavaScript, DevTools scene in general, because it's just a lot of complexity. And I have this whiskey thing I've been working on, but like my problem is in a lot of them, nothing's really excited me for the most part in terms of like groundbreaking ideas or something that's made my life so much more pleasant. And I think part of it is because I still can write code fairly competently, but I'm not really a developer these days. When I'm writing code, I'm just like hacking around on stuff. And so it's been hard to find stuff. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the space, to be fair. But I do bias towards sort of like, I live in the JavaScript ecosystem. What does that tool chain look like? What do things do there for me? And I'm very old school as well. Like I run a bunch of Kubernetes stuff on this service called Northlink because it's not that hard for me.
Oh, Will. He's from the UK. I love Will Stewart.
It's like the Canadians. Everybody knows each other. But yeah, Northlink's been pretty good. Mostly because like if you look now around, everybody's like giant cloud provider, which is insanely expensive. VPS, which I'm scared of. Mostly because often you have to handle your own security or something. Or it's like this PaaS abstraction, which then requires 18 third parties. And I don't want to spend, $1,000 a month on my toy project. Granted, my whiskey website is somehow still costing me like $150 a month, but it's over engineered. But yeah, beyond that, like there's not been much that's like really made my life significantly easier. I am really excited about what Tanner Lindsley is doing in the JavaScript community with TanStack, because I'm a big LAMP guy from back in the day, like normal web stack, request response cycle. I understand these paradigms super, super well, and I think they're good and they're well established and mature. And I think he's probably the closest to bringing something that looks like that to the JavaScript ecosystem, particularly with the sort of the front end rendering cycle, which to me is sorely needed. But beyond that, I haven't actually done a lot. It's like I mostly just like try to entertain myself and continue learning outside of work hours these days. And so it's very rare that it actually ends up like using any kind of tooling or even writing code, unless I'm really feeling it some days. Maybe that'll change this year. We'll see.
That's super cool. And then very last question. If you had to kind of like, just like one piece of advice to like an early stage DevTools founder that just that you'd really, really want them to hear.
2 1-sentence snippets. Don't build a damn status quo thing. Don't build logs or something like that. Like you will fail overnight. So don't just build something that exists for no good reason. Like don't pivot. That's like the same thing. Just don't do that. And then just try a lot harder than you are trying. Like success is just grind. There's nothing more to it. You can be successful at any terrible idea. You can probably be successful at building a log company. You need something that's a little different because like it's crowded. You don't want to be in a super noisy space. This is why the AI space is really complicated right now too. But I just don't think people try hard enough. I don't think they actually recognize what that means. Like, don't have a family and expect work-life balance with 16 children and start a company. Do something else. It's not for you. Your life's gonna suck. Your family is gonna be a disaster. Like it takes sacrifice. It's really hard, and you have to grind. It's the reality of it. Whether people want it to be true or not, it is. Like I don't have kids yet, as an example, and I am almost 40 now, which is I think borderline too, like a little late in life for it. But all I did was work. In my 20s, I did nothing else than work. Yeah, sure, I'd go out at night sometimes with folks and whatnot, but I, sun up to sundown, I'm basically like with peers grinding away at stuff. And that, I think, is also what helped me like make Sentry successful, particularly early days. So,
yeah, that's really good advice. Try hard. Try harder. Try harder.
I think it's like
sacrifice.
It's the one thing you can control.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, David, thank you so much. It was really an honor to speak with you. Someone I've admired for a really long time. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Jack.